It all started with a simple request. "Hey, you there, cleaning?" The voice was loud and full of a bravado that echoed through the quiet gym. Derek Mitchell stood in the center of the mat, his brand new black belt a beacon of arrogance under the bright fluorescent lights. "How about a quick demonstration?" he shouted again, his gaze fixed on the man pushing a mop near the back wall. "I bet you've never seen a real fight in your life, right?" The man, James, stopped what he was doing and slowly looked up. At 42, he was a ghost in this gym. He came in late, cleaned, and was gone before anyone noticed. He'd only been there for 3 weeks, a quiet shadow in a world of loud ambition. "I don't want to bother you, Sensei," James replied calmly, his eyes returning to a stubborn stain on the floor. "Just finishing up so you can get back to it." Derek let out a theatrical laugh that made his 8 students look at each other nervously. "Everyone, look at this! The guy's afraid to even step on the mat!" The students chuckled, uncomfortable but unwilling to defy their instructor. What Derek didn't know was that James had spent the last 2 decades trying to forget who he was. 20 years since he left the ring after an incident that changed his life forever. 20 years of keeping a secret so deep, even his teenage daughter had no idea about it. "Come on, man," Derek continued, approaching him with a mocking smile. "Just a little demonstration. Show my students the difference between someone who trains and someone who just, cleans the floor where real fighters walk." James felt a familiar sensation in his chest, a dormant muscle awakening after years of inactivity. His eyes met Derek's for a split second, and the instructor took an involuntary step back. "Just an educational demonstration," Derek insisted, trying to hide the sudden uncertainty in his voice. "Nothing too serious." James set his mop and bucket down and stood up slowly. His movements had a strange, deliberate fluidity. The students stopped their training, sensing a shift in the air. "All right," James said, his voice as calm as the surface of a lake before a storm. "But when we're done, you're going to apologize to all of them for turning this mat into a circus." Derek laughed, but the sound was forced. "Apologize? You're going to be the one apologizing to the floor when you meet it." The crowd of students formed a semicircle, and Derek adjusted his black belt with a dramatic flourish. "Everyone, you are about to witness a practical demonstration," he announced, gesturing grandly towards James. "The difference between those who dedicate their lives to martial arts and those who just, clean the floor where real fighters walk." A young student named Sarah, a martial arts enthusiast and keen observer, watched with growing discomfort. She sensed something deeply wrong with this spectacle. As Derek continued to taunt James, he made a comment about appropriate places for certain types of people, and Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. James's posture didn't change, but something inside him did. That twinge in his chest, that old familiar ache, was a memory of a time when similar words had preceded a tragedy, a time when he had let the taunts get to him, when his anger had consumed him, leading to a fateful mistake in the ring. "This has nothing to do with race," Derek sneered, sensing Sarah's disapproval. "It has to do with respect for the martial art and knowing your place." James stood there, motionless. It wasn't just Derek's words. It was the look of fear in Sarah's eyes that broke through his years of self-imposed solitude. It reminded him of another person he had failed to protect. That's when Derek made his first fatal mistake. Frustrated by James's silence, he lightly pushed him on the shoulder. It was a simple, harmless touch, but it carried all the arrogance of a man who had never faced real consequences. James absorbed the push without moving an inch. His feet remained planted like ancient oak roots. Derek felt as if he had just tried to shove a concrete wall. His mocking smile faltered for a split second. "Interesting," muttered James, more to himself than to Derek. "It's been a while since someone tried to provoke me like that." The shift in his voice, now low and calm, changed the atmosphere. It wasn't a threat. It was the frightening tranquility of a man who had walked through much darker valleys and emerged transformed.
Derek, unable to interpret the danger signals, doubled down. "Last chance, buddy," he announced. "Either you accept the demonstration like a man, or I call security to escort you out. And guess what? You lose your job, too." James opened his eyes slowly. When his gaze met Derek's, the instructor felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if he had just awakened a dragon he thought was a harmless lizard. "All right," James said, his voice now laden with an authority that made everyone fall silent. "But when we're done, I want you to explain to your students why you turned a place of learning into a circus of humiliation." The tension in the room was palpable. Derek assumed his fighting stance, the one he used to intimidate beginners. James, on the other hand, stood motionless. He simply observed. His eyes scanned Derek from head to toe, cataloging every technical detail. The high guard that left his ribs exposed, the unstable base that compromised his balance, the excessive tension in his shoulders that telegraphed every move. The students looked on, their apprehension growing with each passing second. Sarah, the young student, discreetly pulled out her phone. She felt an urgent need to document this. "Still waiting?" Derek sneered, hopping slightly on his feet. That's when James moved. It wasn't a dramatic change, just a subtle repositioning of his feet, a slight lowering of his center of gravity. But to anyone who knew what to look for, the transformation was instantaneous and frightening. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The man before them was no longer a janitor. He was a predator, a subtle, dangerous one. "Problem?" James asked softly, and Derek instinctively backed away. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. Derek's first punch was technically perfect, a fast, accurate jab, the kind of punch that worked against 99% of people. But James wasn't in the 99%. His body slid to the side like water flowing around a rock, and suddenly Derek was off balance, his arm extended into thin air. "Nice try," James commented softly. "Clean technique, but you telegraphed the move with your right shoulder." Derek spun wildly, trying to locate his opponent. He threw a quick combination, jab, straight, hook. James wasn't there. He lowered himself, leaned back, and took a small step, causing the fists to pass within millimeters of his chin. "Interesting combination," James observed calmly. "Works well against people who stand still, but you're leaving your left side completely exposed." Derek was starting to sweat. He couldn't land a single punch on a man who had supposedly never fought before. "Stop dancing and fight," Derek shouted, launching a desperate series of attacks. That's when James decided the demonstration had gone on long enough. Derek's final combination found only air once again, and when he recovered, James was inexplicably closer. "Do you know the difference between someone who learned to fight in gyms and someone who learned in professional rings?" James asked softly. Before Derek could answer, James simply touched his chest with the palm of his right hand. Derek flew. He wasn't pushed or knocked down. He was literally propelled backward, as if struck by an invisible wave. His feet left the ground, he traveled nearly 6 feet and landed on his back with an impact that made everyone gasp. The silence that followed was absolute.
Derek lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had happened. There was no pain, just the overwhelming force of someone operating on a completely different level. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Actually," James said calmly, reaching out a hand to help Derek up, "it's quite simple once you understand leverage, timing, and energy transfer. Principles I've learned over a 22-year professional career. Derek ignored the hand and stood up on his own, his legs shaking. 22-year professional career in what? He stammered. Sarah, who had been frantically searching on her phone, finally spoke. Her voice was a hushed whisper. "You don't understand who he is, do you?" Everyone turned to her. On her phone, dozens of articles and photos confirmed what her instincts had already told her. James Washington, she read aloud, also known as Silent Storm, a 5-time world mixed martial arts champion. The words hit the room like a bomb. He retired undefeated after an accident that resulted in the death of his training partner. Derek's face went pale. He had challenged a living legend. He had publicly humiliated a man who could have knocked him out with a casual flick of his wrist. I didn't know," he stammered. "If I had known—" "If you had known," James interrupted gently, "would you have treated me with respect? Or would you still have humiliated some other janitor, some other worker who had no credentials to defend himself?" The question cut deeper than any physical blow. Derek realized that James had put his finger on the root of his real problem, not his ignorance about the champion, but his fundamental arrogance. Sarah stepped forward, her voice now firm and clear. "Sensei Derek, what I witnessed today was not teaching. It was bullying disguised as instruction." Other students began to murmur in agreement. "James," Derek said finally, his voice full of a humility no one there had ever heard before, "I sincerely apologize to you, to Sarah, to everyone here. I have no excuse for my behavior." James nodded, accepting the apology with the same grace he had just displayed in their confrontation. "Appreciated, Derek, but apologies are only the first step. The question is, what are you going to do differently from now on?" As Derek looked around at his students, he saw a new kind of respect in their eyes, a respect for James, not for him. He saw their reevaluation of everything they thought they knew about martial arts and its core values. "I'll change. It'll take time, but I'll change." That's when Sarah asked a question that surprised everyone. "Mr. Washington, would you consider teaching again? I think we could all learn a lot more from someone who understands that true strength comes with responsibility." James smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him that night. "Maybe, but not to teach fighting techniques, to teach something much more important, that respect isn't earned with belts or titles, but with character." And so, Derek Mitchell received the most humiliating lesson of his life, a lesson that would change everything. The question that hung in the air was whether one night of humility would be enough to transform decades of arrogance. Would an even deeper change be necessary for true justice to be served? 3 months later, the gym had been completely transformed. James Washington was no longer just the janitor. Sarah Chun had convinced the gym owner to hire him as an instructor specializing in advanced techniques and martial arts philosophy. Derek Mitchell lost half of his students in the first week after the incident. A video Sarah had discreetly recorded spread across social media, showing a black belt being humiliated by a simple janitor. His reputation in the martial arts community was ruined. "Sensei James," Sarah said after a class on respect and humility, "thank you for teaching me that true strength doesn't need to be displayed to be recognized." James smiled, organizing the equipment. "The best lesson I can teach is simple. Never judge someone by their profession or appearance. Everyone carries stories that can surprise us." Derek continued teaching at a smaller gym, but with a humility forced by public shame. He had learned the hard way that arrogance comes at a price. Sometimes justice comes quietly, like a storm that transforms everything without making a sound. James proved that true revenge is not destroying your opponent, but showing that greatness comes from character, not titles.